Since he was a kid, Ethan never really felt like he belonged anywhere. While everyone else was out there having fun with soccer games or just chatting without a care in the world, he stayed on the sidelines, always one step behind. Not because he wanted to, but because the cold words and looks from others kept him at a distance. He wasn't the popular guy. In fact, he was more like the opposite, the weirdo. The one who, even though he wanted to get closer, always felt out of place, like he was living in a parallel universe. Every day he'd put on a forced smile, trying to hide what was going on inside. But no one saw it, no one understood. Over the years, the disdain and indifference from others turned into more than just actions. They became a weight, a truth he couldn't change. It was a truth that, instead of defining him, trapped him. He felt like a spectator in his own life, unable to get in the scene. Whenever he tried to get close, doors would close. And when he pulled away, the emptiness grew stronger. Still, he kept trying. He tried to be the nice guy, the helpful one, the one who always said yes, even when exhaustion took over. It was the role he chose for himself, afraid of being rejected again. Because deep down, Ethan knew, if he wasn't the nice guy, no one would even notice he was there. If he wasn't useful to others, who would care? The need to fit in consumed him, but rejection made him retreat. He always felt like a weird piece in a puzzle that would never fit. The years went by, and loneliness became more than just a companion, it became his best friend. He gave himself to it completely because it was the only thing that accepted him for who he was. But even so, there was always this small glimmer of hope, a faint spark that kept fighting to stay alive within him. Deep down, Ethan believed things could be different. He just didn't know how or when. And the pain of that uncertainty followed him every day. It wasn't until he decided to truly isolate himself, distancing from everything and everyone, that he began to rebuild his identity. He stopped trying to be something he wasn't and focused on figuring out who he really was. It wasn't easy. Every day felt like an internal battle. Looking at the mirror and seeing a stranger was terrifying. He'd question himself, compare himself, and feel this huge emptiness. But little by little, the process of creating his new self started to take shape. He stopped being the nice guy, the one who always said yes, the one who always did what others wanted. He started saying no, putting his own feelings first. It was painful, of course, but at the same time it was freeing. He began to understand what it really meant to be true to himself and not to others. By doing this, he became stronger both emotionally and physically. The confidence he once lacked slowly began to grow. He didn't want to be the center of attention anymore, but he also didn't want to hide in the shadows. In the days that followed, Ethan found himself facing something he never imagined: respect. For the first time, people saw him not for what he could do for them, but for who he was. He was someone different, someone strong, someone with presence. The change was clear in his posture, in the way he spoke. He wasn't the weirdo hiding in the corner anymore. He was now a man in his full form. But despite all that, something still haunted him. A lingering doubt. A question that echoed in his mind. What if I had always been like this? What would have happened if he'd allowed himself to be this version of himself from the beginning? How many moments would he have lived differently, without fear, without the need to please others? What if everything could have been different? That doubt turned into an obsession. It was like a flame that never went out. Ethan couldn't stop thinking about it. The feeling that something in his life had been lost, something he'd never get back, bothered him deeply. He wanted more than the strength he'd gained. He wanted to fix everything that had shaped him, everything that made him who he was. But how? How could he change the course of destiny? This led him on a never-ending search for an answer. A solution to erase the scars of the past and live a life without regrets. Then he heard about something that could change everything. A rumor. Something about a mysterious wizard known for his ability to bend time. People said he could turn back time, alter the past, rewrite the story of anyone brave enough to ask for it. When he heard this, an audacious idea took over Ethan. If time could be manipulated, then maybe he could change the course of his own life. Maybe he could go back to the past and stop that weak, submissive version of himself from ever taking shape. Maybe, just maybe, he could finally find the peace he'd been longing for. The decision was instant. He knew that what he was about to do would change his life forever, but at the same time he couldn't resist. The desire to fix what he saw as an unforgivable mistake completely took over him. Ethan set out to find this wizard. The journey was tough and the search for answers relentless. He knew the wizard existed, but no one knew where he was or even if he was real. The legends about him were vague and unclear. But Ethan wasn't discouraged. He knew this was his only chance to change his destiny, and nothing could stop him. His mind was consumed with the thought that, by fixing the past, he would finally achieve the happiness and fulfillment he'd been longing for. What he didn't know was that this decision came with a much higher price than he could imagine. In the end, Ethan knew that time had its own rules and he was about to challenge them. When he reached the final point of his search, a wave of nervousness hit his body. He didn't know what to expect, but he knew that no matter what happened, his life would never be the same. And so, he made the irreversible decision. What came next he couldn't predict, but he was ready to face it. And that was the only certainty he had at that moment. He couldn't turn back now. The wizard Ethan was searching for was a living legend, a being who existed somewhere between the real and the imaginary. They said he lived in a remote place, far from any civilization, where time seemed to stand still. It was like the wizard was a figure who only appeared for those who truly needed him, like an entity that came only in moments of extreme necessity. Ethan had heard about him from an old hermit, who told him stories of mysterious encounters and wishes granted at a price no one ever wanted to pay. But for Ethan, the price was a minor detail compared to the chance of fixing the mistakes of the past. The pain of being someone who never fit in consumed him, and he was willing to do anything to change that. When the idea of seeking out the wizard formed in his mind, it became an obsession. He knew that once he found it, his life would take a different turn, but he wasn't ready for what that really meant. The journey was way harder than he had imagined. The wizard was in some remote place, beyond raging rivers and treacherous mountains. He crossed dense, desolate forests, always searching for something that seemed to slip through his hands like sand. The world around him seemed to fall apart as he got closer to his goal, as if nature was testing his determination. But Ethan couldn't turn back. Every step pulled him farther from his past and closer to the future he had pictured. He found himself on a never-ending search, no rest, no time to catch his breath. The exhaustion weighed him down, but the promise of transformation kept him going. What he didn't know was that the wizard, being a being of ancient forces, wasn't just there to grant wishes. He had his own secrets, and Ethan would be tested in ways he couldn't even imagine. In the middle of his journey, Ethan began to question if he had made the right choice. He felt more lost than ever. The paths seemed endless, and the loneliness started to crush him. But at the same time, there was this sense that he was closer than ever to his goal. With every step, it felt like something was guiding him. Something he couldn't explain, but he felt it in every fiber of his being. Was it the wizard? Or was it just the reflection of his own desperate desire for change? He didn't know, but he was determined to find out. The truth was, Ethan no longer knew what he was even searching for. He didn't know if he was after a wizard or just trying to find meaning in his life. When he finally reached the place where the wizard lived, he was speechless. The place was an old structure, surrounded by stones and covered in moss, like it had risen straight from the earth, born from a forgotten era. The energy of the place was almost tangible, like the space itself was alive. It was a heavy environment, charged with a sense of expectation. Ethan felt a mix of fear and fascination. He knew he was about to face something that would change his life forever. But at the same time, there was this feeling that he had already crossed a line he couldn't come back from. And with that, the first real doubts crept in. The wizard wasn't there just to grant wishes. He was something more, something that went beyond human understanding. As he entered the wizard's dwelling, Ethan was immediately surrounded by an imposing presence. The wizard wasn't the old wise man he had imagined, but a mysterious figure with an undefinable appearance. His eyes were deep, like abysses reflecting the universe itself, and his voice, when he spoke, echoed through the room like a distant whisper. "You came seeking power, but you don't understand the weight of what you're asking for," said the wizard, his words resonating like a warning. But Ethan was determined. He didn't want to hear about the dangers. He wanted his chance to change everything. "I just need one shot. Just one shot to fix what I've lost," he replied, his voice filled with desperate urgency. The wizard stared at him for a long moment, like he was reading every thought and every feeling that crossed Ethan's mind. The tension was thick. But the wizard, instead of pulling back, smiled. "You think you know what you want, but you haven't yet understood what you're really asking for." Ethan felt disarmed. How could the wizard know what he was feeling? How did he know what Ethan wanted? The wizard seemed to be on another level of understanding, like he was ahead of time and space. Ethan felt like, while talking to the wizard, he wasn't just being watched by him, but by forces he couldn't even comprehend. that made him even more anxious. I can't live with these doubts anymore. I need to change what I've done, the choices I've made. Can you give me that? Ethan begged, the need in his voice as real as the pain in his chest. The wizard, once again, looked at him like he was weighing the implications of that request. Change comes with a price. A price you can't pay with riches or power. What you seek will be yours, but only if you can handle what it means. Ethan felt trapped between the desire to have the power to change his life and the fear of what that could involve. He didn't want to think about the price. Not now. He had already lost too much to worry about the consequences. I accept, he said, his decision made with blind conviction. And with that, the wizard made a gesture, and a strange energy started emanating around them. It was like time and space were being twisted. Ethan felt a wave of energy surging through his body, like he was being carried by a force greater than him. He didn't know what was happening, but one thing was clear. His life was about to change. He didn't know if it would be for the better or worse, but something inside him told him that, by accepting the price, he was closer than ever to finding real peace. The wizard stepped back, leaving Ethan standing in the center of the room. Now you know the weight of your desire. Just remember, not all change brings the peace you seek. Some, instead, bring the truth. The wizard's words echoed as the room began to fade, and Ethan was consumed by a sense of disorientation. He didn't know where he was or what was about to happen. All he knew was that his journey was far from over. He had made his choice, and now he had to face the consequences. The transformation Ethan went through was intense and painful. He felt like every fiber of his being was being restructured, like the very fabric of his identity was being altered. The sensation was overwhelming, like he was being consumed by a force he couldn't control. But at the same time, there was this strange sense of freedom, like the chains that had kept him tied to his past life were breaking. He didn't know what exactly was happening, but one thing was clear. He wasn't going to be the same person. He didn't see himself as the man he was before seeking the wizard. The pain of the change was immense, but there was also a spark of hope in his mind. He had made his choice, and now he was living the consequences. What he didn't know was that this transformation didn't just mean power or wisdom, but something deeper, something he was still far from understanding. When the pain began to fade, Ethan found himself in a completely different place. The scene around him was desolate and gloomy, an empty space where time seemed to have stopped. The shadows stretched like fingers from an invisible hand, and the air was heavy with a sense of desolation. There were no signs of life, no signs of hope. What had happened? He looked around, trying to find something familiar, but all he found was an abyss of darkness. Where am I? He murmured to himself, the feeling of loss and confusion filling his chest. He was completely alone, not knowing what to do or where to go. But a voice, low and distant, echoed in his mind. You saw change. Now change is all you'll be. Ethan tried to focus, forcing his thoughts to rearrange. He tried to remember the words of the wizard, but they seemed blurry, as if they were fading in the wind. Change, truth, peace, he muttered, trying to figure out what all this meant. But before he could reflect any further, he heard a sound, soft but penetrating, like a distant melody. He followed the sound, feeling a strange sense of urgency. He knew he had to understand what was happening, and the sound seemed to guide him. When he reached the center of the void, he found a figure, a woman who seemed made of pure light. Her eyes were deep, as if they reflected the universe, and her presence radiated an ancient wisdom. Who are you? Ethan asked, doubt still filling his mind. The woman looked at him with a cryptic smile, as if she knew more about him than he knew about himself. I am the guardian of your destiny, she answered, her voice soft like the breeze. You sought change, and now you stand before the truth it brings. What you saw as a solution may, in fact, be the greatest challenge of all. Ethan felt a wave of confusion, but the woman continued, not giving him time to process her words. What you asked for is not simple, Ethan. Change is a winding path, and only the strongest can survive it. He wanted to protest, to argue that he was ready, but the words stuck in his throat. The woman seemed to see right through him, as if she knew all his fears and doubts. You thought you could control your destiny, the woman said, but destiny is more complex than you imagine. What you seek, the power to change, comes at a cost. Are you aware of that? Ethan swallowed hard. He knew there was a price, but he never imagined it would be so grand. He wanted to answer, wanted to say he was willing to pay any price, but the words wouldn't come out. The woman looked at him with a serious, almost sad expression. You have the power now, but what will you do with it? She slowly approached him, and suddenly, a cold shiver ran down his spine. True transformation doesn't come from power, but from the choice to use it. The woman extended her hand, and an image appeared before Ethan. It was his life, but distorted, as if it had been shaped by his wrong choices. He saw the pain and regrets he had tried to forget. He saw the people he had hurt, the paths he had taken that led him further from happiness. He saw that, despite all his attempts to change, the weight of his past still followed him like a shadow. The vision shook him to the core. He had sought change to escape the pain, but now he saw there was no running from it. What had he done? The woman looked at him, her gaze full of compassion. You can't change the past, Ethan. But you can choose what to do with the future. That's what really matters. Ethan felt a tear roll down his face, but there was no more anger or frustration. Only a quiet sadness. He knew that even with the power to change, he still had to face the choices he made. He couldn't escape who he really was. But at the same time, there was a sense of clarity rising inside him. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew he had the chance to make the right choices now. The woman smiled as if she had read his thoughts. Now you understand, she said. Change isn't about altering what was, but deciding what to do with what you have. The vision disappeared, and Ethan found himself back in that dark void, but now he was different. He felt the strength of his decisions flowing through him, stronger than ever. He knew that true transformation wasn't about the power he had gained, but about how he chose to use it. He had the chance to create a new path for himself. It wouldn't be easy, but he was ready. And then, with a sigh, he launched himself into the unknown, ready to face whatever was necessary to redeem himself and maybe find true peace. Ethan was in a state of complete confusion. He had been transported back to the present, believing he had finally fixed his life. But when he looked around, things weren't the way he imagined. The world he knew now seemed strange, distorted. He tried to hold on to reality, like his mind was trying to process something that didn't make sense. The smell of the air was different, people seemed more distant, and the weight of his presence in the world felt lighter, as if he didn't have a true place in that space anymore. He wondered if something had changed, but at the same time he felt a strange sensation that there was something more. Soon he realized something was wrong. The streets were emptier, and the city didn't have the same energy. People hurried past, their eyes empty, as if they were losing something, or running from something they couldn't see. Ethan felt like he was being pulled into a parallel reality, a distorted version of his life. His house was deserted, and when he tried to find someone who knew him, he found only indifferent stares. What had happened to him? He couldn't trust his own perceptions anymore. Where were the people he loved, the friends he knew? The feeling of disconnection grew, and the anxiety became more and more present. But then, in the middle of this chaos, he saw him. A tall man with an imposing posture, piercing eyes, and a cold smile that seemed to radiate power. This man was different from the others. He seemed familiar, but at the same time, completely different. Ethan froze for a moment, trying to understand what was happening. The man approached with a calm that was almost terrifying, as if he knew exactly who Ethan was and what he had done. "You're back," the man said, his voice deep and menacing. "I knew it wouldn't be long before you returned." Ethan took a step back, his heart racing. He tried to force his mind to understand, to connect the dots, but everything seemed out of place. "Who are you?" he asked, trying to stay calm. The man smiled, as if he were savoring Ethan's confusion. "You really don't know?" he asked, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "I am what you've become. I am the result of your choices." The words cut through Ethan like a sharp blade. He felt a chill run down his spine. The man before him was an alternative version of himself, but he wasn't like him. He was something more, something Ethan didn't want to be. The revelation hit him like a punch to the stomach. He was facing an alternative version of himself, one that had never gone through the pain, the quest for redemption. This Ethan hadn't faced the same conflicts, hadn't isolated himself or broken into pieces. He had embraced his power, but at the cost of his humanity. The fury Ethan had contained his whole life was now free, and the man before him was the result of that repressed anger. He was unstoppable, limitless. No remorse. And now there he was, ready to eliminate the only threat to his existence, the original Ethan himself. Rage began to bubble up inside Ethan. He didn't know what to do. He wasn't prepared to face something like this. But at the same time, a part of him felt like there was no other choice. He couldn't let that thing control him, he couldn't let it take over his life. He had to fight, he had to face the monster he himself had created. But what could possibly defeat a version of himself who had nothing to lose? Ethan clenched his fists and took a deep breath, feeling the adrenaline surge through his body. It was time to make a decision. The man smiled, watching Ethan's move. "You can try," he said, "but you'll never be like me. I am what you could have been if you had listened to your instincts. You're weak. You're a shadow of what I am now." His words were venomous, trying to break Ethan's confidence, making him believe there was no way out. But deep down, Ethan knew that wasn't true. He had something this man didn't: his humanity. He might not be the strongest physically, but his heart, his spirit, were more powerful than any rage or blind strength. He had to believe that, he had to hold on to that last bit of hope. Ethan moved forward, determined, and the man did the same. The fight wasn't just physical. It was a mental and emotional battle. Each blow from Ethan came with memories of his journey, the pain he had faced and overcome. Each move from the other Ethan was an expression of anger and contempt. The blades clashed with a deafening bang, and the ground around them seemed to tremble with the intensity of the confrontation. They were fighting, but deep down, the real fight was inside Ethan. He was facing the worst part of himself, the part of his soul he had rejected. But this was the only way to win. He had to accept who he truly was. As the battle intensified, Ethan realized something crucial. It wasn't about defeating the other Ethan, but about accepting his own humanity, his flaws, his weaknesses. He didn't need to be perfect, he didn't need to be unbeatable. He just needed to be true to who he was. And as he remembered the lessons the wizard had taught him, he realized that real strength wasn't about being the strongest, but knowing when to fight and when to surrender. He knew that to win this battle, he didn't need to be a copy of the other. He needed to be the real Ethan, the man who had chosen to change, the man who still had hope, despite everything. And it was in that moment that Ethan made his boldest move. He let himself fall back, pretending to be defeated, letting the other Ethan's rage take over. And when the man got closer with a triumphant smile, Ethan made his final strike, a quick and precise move that cut through the enemy's defense and brought him down. The other Ethan screamed, but it wasn't out of pain. It was a scream of frustration, seeing his own strength and rage defeated by his other self's decision. The fight was almost over, but Ethan knew something was still coming. Destiny couldn't be resolved with just one battle. The real challenge was just beginning. The battle finally came to an end, but Ethan knew his fight was far from over. The other Ethan had fallen, but the weight of what he had learned wasn't letting him rest. The victory tasted bitter. He felt like the truth was revealing itself in a way he couldn't ignore, a truth that brought with it a new challenge. The Time Wizard, who had helped him go back to the past, appeared through the mist that was forming around them. His gaze was intense, almost like he knew what was coming before Ethan even realized. "You won the battle, but what did you learn?" asked the wizard with a deep yet not cruel voice. He was there to explain what Ethan still didn't understand. Ethan looked at him, confused, exhausted, but determined to listen. "I accepted who I am. I faced my own anger, my darkest version. But that's not enough, right?" he asked, trying to understand. The wizard shook his head. "Accepting who you are isn't enough. You need to learn to live with what you've done, with what fate has brought you. It's not just about redemption, but about sacrifice." The wizard paused, as if the words that were coming were of immense importance. The true sacrifice isn't what you do for others, but what you do for yourself to find peace. Those words echoed in Ethan's mind, and he felt a heavy weight settle in his chest. The physical fight against his alternative self had been tough, but now the battle was in Ethan's heart and mind. He started to realize that the confrontation with the other Ethan wasn't just about defeating him, but about accepting the true essence of who he was. The Time Wizard, with all his wisdom, knew that Ethan needed more than just a simple victory. He needed understanding, and that's what he was seeking there. A man's journey isn't measured by his wins or losses. If you measure the value of your life by the mistakes you've made, you'll never find true peace. Sacrifice, my young friend, is knowing what you've lost to become who you are today. Ethan felt the wizard's words penetrate his being, challenging everything he had believed to be true. He was ready to fight, to change his life, but now he understood that true change didn't come only from his actions, but from accepting what he had become. The destiny he sought wasn't about changing the past anymore, but about living fully with the consequences of his choices. "You'll need to accept the pain, the losses, the mistakes," said the wizard, as if offering him a vision of the future. "But know that by doing so, you'll find a path to redemption greater than any you've imagined." Those words resonated in Ethan as he walked back to his life. He knew that the journey he had started had been much more than he thought. He no longer had the power to change what had already happened, but he had the power to transform his own perspective on what the future could still be. The fate of each one of us is forged in the choices we make, but also in accepting the things we cannot change. Ethan felt a spark of hope rise within him. He was ready to face whatever was coming, with a new understanding of himself and his purpose. As he walked through the streets, he knew the battle wasn't over yet. He might not be chasing a perfect past anymore, but his fight now was to create a future where he could live in peace with himself. He didn't need perfection, the absence of flaws. He knew that true strength lay in his ability to keep moving forward, despite the challenges. Life, after all, wasn't about being unbeatable. It was about being true to who you are, and that's exactly what he was going to do from then on. He would fight, not against the world or the people around him, but against the doubt and fear that still lived in his heart. He wasn't exactly sure what the future had in store for him, but something inside him told him that no matter what happened, he was stronger than before. The wizard was right. It wasn't about what he had lost, but about who he was now. He wasn't carrying the weight of a past he couldn't change anymore. He was building a new story for himself, and that gave him a sense of freedom, of renewal. The feeling of finally being in control of his destiny was something he never thought he'd feel. It was a feeling he knew he had to embrace. But the wizard wasn't done speaking. "Remember," he said as he faded into the mist, "the path you've walked won't be easy, and the sacrifice you'll have to make will be big. But there's something you still need to understand. True strength doesn't just come from what you learn, but from what you decide to leave behind." Those words stuck with Ethan as he moved forward. He knew the journey was far from over. The next challenge was lurking, but he was ready. He had learned to accept himself, to be who he was, and that made him stronger than any physical power or strength he could have. As he looked at the horizon, Ethan felt one last wave of clarity. He didn't know where this path would take him, but he knew that now he was ready to face the future with courage. The sacrifice wasn't about what he had lost anymore, but about what he was willing to leave behind. He didn't need to be perfect, but he needed to be true to himself. And with that, he moved forward toward the next challenge, knowing that from now on, the real battle would be internal. What was coming wouldn't be easy, but he knew he was more prepared than ever. His destiny was still to be written. As the battle between Ethan and his darker self intensifies, the real conflict goes beyond the physical. He realizes that the greatest enemy isn't his dark version, but what he himself left behind, the choices he made and the weight of what it would mean to change the past. Every blow exchanged wasn't just a fight for survival, but for the acceptance of who he truly is. Time, as the Time Wizard warned, always comes with a price. But by facing this reality, Ethan finds his true strength not in changing what was, but in learning how to live with what he's become. In the end, he finds true redemption, not through victories, but through accepting his journey and forgiving himself. What would you do if you were in Ethan's shoes? Do you think he made the right choices? His battle wasn't just against a physical enemy, but against the ghosts of his own past. What would you learn from that? If you like this story, don't forget to drop a comment, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications for more stories like this. I'll see you in the next video.